Hello and welcome to the AI Engineering Podcast, your guide to the fast-moving world of building scalable and maintainable AI systems. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Tsavo Knott about Pieces, a personal AI toolkit to improve the efficiency of developers. So, Tsavo, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hey, yeah. Thanks for having me on, Tobias. Tsavo Knott here. I'm a technical co-founder and CEO at Pieces for Developers. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we're going to talk about, all things developer tooling, developer productivity, and just AI capabilities, what it means for our product, what it means for, developer experiences at large. And yeah, pretty excited to get into it.
And do you remember how you first got involved in machine learning?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was actually I think 17 or 18, and we were starting a language learning company. And basically, we kind of broke it down into this idea that there were, visual learners, auditorial learners, and textual learners, right? And this company was called Accent.ai, right? We had the .ai domain like way back in the day. And basically, it would learn how you would learn most efficiently, right? If you interacted with visual content, textual content, or auditorial content, it would determine like what is the most efficient way for you to process this material, and then it would continually like reweight future content of lessons so that your efficiencies were going up, right? And so that was like kind of first early days application of AI, and when we were thinking about things, I was like, that was almost a decade ago. I'm 27 now. I was 17. Like that was company number one, and we just always have been thinking about, like, at least in a lot of my experience with technology, I've always been thinking about how it conforms to the way we think, right? And building systems that feel natural to interact with, and just, if I was teaching someone, that's how I would do it, right? So why can't I build that into a system? But yeah, that was a good question. That was way back in the day, and we've been doing work around that space ever since.
Now, digging into the Pieces project, which is what you are dedicating a lot of your time to currently, can you give a bit of an overview about what it is, some of the story behind how it came to be, and why this is where you decided to spend your time and energy?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, fundamentally, Pieces is about changing the way that developers or professional creators at large interact with small bits of workflow material throughout that work in progress journey, right? So if you think about it, like developers, they're in three major locations: the browser, the IDE, and the collaborative environment, right? So they're researching and problem solving, they have 50 tabs open, they're in their IDE, got a bunch of repositories open, jumping around, writing code, doing whatever else. And then, of course, they're in that collaborative space doing cross-functional team collaboration, going back and forth with team members, commenting here and there in async or synchronous regard. And so, this work in progress journey actually drums up a lot of nuanced small details. And that's actually kind of why our job, I always like to describe it as half remembering something and looking up the rest, right? And so these nuanced details of workflow context, they're always lost, right? I feel like at the end of the day, I commit that PR or I send some stuff up and I close all my tabs, and that whole work in progress journey is really uncaptured, right? And it also takes a lot of time to really document it myself. I want to move quickly. I'm doing some context switching. I'm like, hey, I'll probably figure it out later. So Pieces really started out as a place to just be a home for the small things that you want to fire and forget, notably like code snippets or configs or links or screenshots or just kind of like small bits of material where, like, I don't need to formally document this right now, but I know I might need this later to pick up where I left off or backtrack. I'm just going to select some stuff, save to Pieces, and hopefully be able to find it later. But once you start to fire and forget all these materials over to Pieces, you need some type of enrichment, right? What else is it related to? Can I tag this stuff automatically? Can I associate documentation links and people? Can I relate two materials together? And so that's where, a lot of the enrichment kind of came into place. Is why do I have to label this, title it, classify what code language it is, classify, who it's related to and all that stuff? That should all be done for me because I want to move quick, right? And then, the other component now is like, I'm also generating a lot of code and I'm going back and forth. And so I should be able to conversationally interact with the things I have in Pieces to both generate new materials, but also find, discover, and iterate on existing ones. And can we use the context of your workflow, the things that Pieces is aware about, to ground those models and give you better responses? And then the final component of Pieces is really that developers, it's funny, they always realize they should have saved something. At the moment, they realize they didn't save it. And that's right about the time they've gone to look something up again. And they're like, oh man, it is lost. I know like this framework upgrade, I did it 6 months ago or 8 months ago. There was one small nuance that's just gone, right? And you're like back at it, square one, Google searches, GitHub issues, team member questions, all that stuff. And so we want pieces to solve that problem where you don't have to think to save important things, right? Can pieces pick up on what's important, triangulate the overlap between the browser, the IDE, and that collaborative space, and capture that stuff for you. And the goal is not to capture everything, but also to decay things that are less relevant and to promote things that are relevant. And that's kind of like the proactive phase that we're in right now, where a lot of our users will start to see this kind of idea of pieces doing a lot more proactive work, and also starting to serve that back to you in what we're calling the Copilot feed, which will roll out this quarter. So I know I threw a lot at you right there, but that's the essence, is just that work in progress journey. Can you have a little sidekick that's just capturing the small details?
There has been a lot of development and progress and churn in the overall space of personalized AI tools over the past few months to a year, particularly since the launch of ChatGPT and some of its different subsequent iterations. And I'm wondering, what are some of the areas of focus of pieces and the capabilities that you're building into that make it stand out from the alternatives, and would encourage somebody to invest in integrating that into their workflow? And particularly for developers who are very particular about their workflows, they don't want to invest the time and muscle memory in learning a new thing that's going to become part of their core inner loop if there's the risk that it's going to go away in a few weeks or a few months.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And so two things there. First and foremost, you brought up this idea of developers having to invest time, right? And I think that's the problem with many tools today, is that there's a learning curve, right? You have to really try to understand how to use it, how to integrate it, things like that. And so, our approach with pieces, and this is really rapidly where we've been building towards, is can it be a tool between tools where you actually don't have to think to use it, right? The system is just aware, and then when you need something, either it's giving it to you or you can go and find it, right? And it's already captured. And so, that learning curve where it's like, oh, I have to build a new habit. I think that AI enables us to kind of remove that from the product adoption process, right? But then the second thing is this, what makes pieces unique is really like a couple of things. First and foremost, respecting the privacy of a developer or really any individual's workflow is first and foremost, right? This also goes along with the speed of the AI tool itself. So we invested a long time ago in kind of local on-device models, right? All the models that tag and enrich and organize and embed, all of that runs completely on device. Like I have a MacBook Air, and it runs an M2 chip, and we saw this, right? We saw this with the MPUs, we saw this with the Tensor chips, we saw this with the M series. We knew that client-side devices should be able to run ML continuously, quickly, and respect the privacy that you would expect, to date, right? And so that also leads us to be able to integrate small bits of ML that are task oriented and purpose driven throughout the workflow. And I think like, you have these large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini and stuff like that. And of course you can bring those into pieces, but you also need like smaller models that just do the simple things, right? Like how about titling files or tagging stuff, right? Or just, giving you search results that are interesting. We've kind of heavily invested into both. Now, when it comes to these large language models, I think the key is context, right? And the thing about pieces is that we sit across the browser, the IDE, and that collaborative environment to give your large language model the awareness of the entire workflow. Right now, for example, if you want to use OpenAI, you got to go to a browser tab. You got to say, here's a bunch of context. Here's what's important to me. And then use that to then prompt the question you're looking for. You have to provide that context. Pieces, for example, can take an enterprise OpenAI license, take it out of that single browser tab, and put it everywhere that that developer is. So I think like to get the most out of these large language models, they do need context. They do need relevant kind of things to look at before you prompt it for a response. So the integration kind of like efforts that we put forth are really about grounding large language models in the most amount of horizontal context, as opposed to going very deep within one domain. And then, yeah, I mean, I think the final thing is conversational copilots. I think that's a little laborious, to be completely honest. Like we built one, primarily because we think that it's going to be a paradigm shift, and it's a must have, right? It's table stakes. You need to be able to talk to your materials, but also too, like no one wants to have a conversation back and forth, right? To be completely honest, it's like probably not right the first time, the second time, or even the third time. And then when it is right, you're like, okay, I definitely want to like save this output somewhere, right? So of course we integrated the generative and the curative processes like generate, curate, and iterate. But we are jumping right over that. And we're saying like it should really just be a stream of saved, generated, captured materials elevated to you at all times, right? And I shouldn't have to do these searches. I shouldn't have to do these generative cycles. I mean, you look at systems like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and like all these algorithms are optimized to give you things that are interesting. Why don't we apply that to workflow materials, right? And that's exactly what we're doing. We're saying like this should just be aware of what's important to save, but then also aware of what I need and when I need it from your workflow context. And I think that's really the route we're going. And so while we're going to see a lot more efforts in these co-pilots and a lot more competition from the big players and things like that, we're going to continue to play Switzerland, continue to integrate, continue to contextualize these systems, but also to just change the experience at large. So yeah, I think we'll be around for a good bit more time. Let's say that.
Another interesting aspect of this problem is, to your point, you're not just leaning on large language models. You're also thinking about what are some of these curative models or smaller models that we can run on device and in low power or embedded contexts. And I'm wondering what your process looks like for determining which models to integrate, which models to expose, and some of the ways to think about tuning and contextualizing of those models to ensure that you're giving useful results to the end user without forcing them to go through their own iterative cycle of saying, okay, well, I want this to be useful. Now I need to spend a bunch of time on making it that way.
Yeah, I would say, we can get a little technical here, and I'm sure you've got some technical listeners, but what I would say is there's a couple of right tools for the right job here, right? And what I would say is first is your embedding space. So early days, we started out with this kind of like pre-shipped spherical embedding space that represented tags and titles and suggested searches and things like that. And that wasn't very helpful because when a user added a tag manually, we wanted that user added tag to now be integrated dynamically into that embedding space. So the next time that user added tag can actually be, suggested and automatically added to a related material. Same for websites and links and things like that. So just like picking the right embedding space is super important. We wanted one that expands over time as opposed to stay static. And the second thing is there are models for classifying like what type of language something is, right? I think we support like 50 or so language classifications. That was like a pretty primitive type of model. I think it was based on the T5 from Salesforce that came out a while ago. And then we just fine tuned that, and we kind of dynamically inject these embedding layers, these LoRa layers, if you will, at runtime. And we can actually say the core of the T5 is pretty good at generating a title or classifying a language or generating tags. But to make it just a little bit better, we can say, here's that extra layer of embeddings to do that task specifically. And then when it comes to large language models, I think the biggest challenge right now is context window, and then just like in memory usage, right? And so if you use, for example, llama 2 or Mistral with pieces, it's going to use about 4 to 5 gigs of RAM. Your tokens per second, they're pretty decent, and I will say it's nice because it's offline, so it's always going to be constant. But the thing is, how do you fit into a llama 2 the proper amount of tokens for context and the proper amount of tokens for prompting, versus if you have a large language model like the 128K GPT 3.5 Turbo? Well, of course, you can just yeet all types of stuff up there. But anything over the wire, you also have to consider your payload size, right? If I'm uploading 5 files every single time I'm asking the question, maybe that's not very efficient either. So all the considerations, just kind of coming down to it, it's really about thinking, what are the lowest common denominator themes that we have to be aware of, and those are your constraints, and building up from there, given the relaxation of those constraints. But also too, like, do we need to bring a sledgehammer to a job that we can just use a a normal hammer, right? We don't need a large language model to classify a title for something, right? Or a tag for something. And I think like that's where we've decided to distill down, large models into smaller models for certain tasks to use classical kind of algorithmic approaches and graphical approaches and not just throw large language models at everything. That would be the summation of that.
The other challenge when you're dealing with machine learning in any context is that it's the whole principle of garbage in, garbage out, where if you're not feeding it useful data or you're not feeding the data to the models in a format that they can understand, then you're not going to get any useful results from it. And given the fact that you are dealing with an uncontrolled environment where it's somebody else's laptop or desktop, you have no idea what software they're going to be running on it. You have no idea exactly how data is going to be populated into the piece's context. What are some of the approaches that you're taking to manage some of that data preparation, data cleaning, data serving to the models to ensure that you're providing some useful outputs to the end user?
Yeah, and also too, like talking about model drift. I think a lot of people like, they don't really talk about model drift sometimes, but like models act up in the wild all the time, right? And I think for the most part, our users will, tell us if something's like way off, right? Like we had a model that just somewhere somehow just decided to start putting out Spanish, right? I think it's just like Llama 2, and like overnight this user's like kind of copilot just decided it wanted to, start outputting in Spanish. We're like, what is going on there? And I think like at that point, we're still trying to understand what causes model drift. There's a little bit of like black box nuances to all of large language models. Even OpenAI, they're like, why is ChatGPT 3 getting worse over time or something? Like, it's a lot of things to understand. But what I would say is the things we can control, we do control, right? And so we kind of use a lot of double check systems where we have a model that will kind of adversarially evaluate the output of a different model and saying like, is this good, is this bad? And I think the double check systems are pretty good. We're working on a model right now where it can determine if the co-pilot conversation has gotten too far off topic or if the output is just completely unrelated. And it's kind of like a binary, like, is this good or is this bad? And that actually, you can actually start to see that pretty clearly. For us humans, it's trivial to say, okay, we're off topic or this is a bad output, but training kind of that double check small model across all types of outputs, both conversational ones as well as just like labels and tags and titles. That's really where we're putting in a lot of like quality assurance work, if you will. It's not the best, it's not the most interesting, not the most fun work to do, but at scale, like, we're at like 10K daily active users. I can't even imagine 100K, like the amount of random support tickets coming in. But, at scale, we're going to have to do a lot of work around that.
And so, digging now into the design and development of the pieces product, I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the ways that you think about how to approach the architecture, the integration paths, the types of integrations and inputs that you need to be able to support, and just some of the ways that the overall design and goals of the project have changed from when you first started thinking about it.
Yeah, I would say, we specifically when it comes to architecture, we talk about on device first, edge ML. That was always like a, table stakes for us. We knew we'd be going into large companies. We knew we'd be dealing with code that's sensitive or has a lot of IP associated with it or things like that. So we had to say, I should be able to do this entire demo Wi-Fi off, right? And that was kind of first and foremost. So then you're saying, okay, without the internet, not networking, but without the internet itself, how do our integrations communicate, right? And so a lot of users have always been curious about why we ship the Pieces OS service in addition to like the desktop app or some of the others. And that's because Pieces OS basically hosts a local server on your computer. And that's, again, air gapped, where all the integrations talk to it. Pieces OS will host all the machine learning. It'll host your Llama instance. It'll host whatever you need. It's also the kind of on-device database where these other systems can be powered by it. Now, the funny thing there is, of course, we're building a whole bunch of integrations, but we have a large open source initiative going on where we're opening up our SDKs, right? We have over 200 endpoints where if you want to build a Copilot agent on a Mistral large language model, you can absolutely do that with our endpoints. And so a lot of interesting things are coming out from the community about just integrations like Emacs or Vim or some of the others where we might not be experts in those languages, I can't even remember what Vim is written in. I think it's like Erlang, but not Erlang. Do you know by chance?
So Vim, the core application, I think, is largely written in C, and then the language that you use to configure it is its own particular dialect called VimScript, and now there's the
Okay, yeah.
NVim project or NeoVim that also incorporates Lua capabilities. So it's a
Oh, that's what it was. The
complicated
Lua stuff.
hodgepodge of things.
Yeah, so like I said, like I'm not an expert in that. I'm pretty good at Dart and Flutter and TypeScript and things, but our community is much better at those things. So I think by being an on-device, kind of server type of architecture, it's very extensible. It's very easy to like triple validate, like, hey, this is running offline, and oh, by the way, we can really scale the amount of things that pieces can communicate with, right? So it can communicate with our Chrome extension, our VS Code extension, JetBrains, you name it, and truly be kind of local first. That said, now going from that architecture into like teams and enterprise architectures, that's really interesting for us. You're dealing with retrieval augmented generation across an entire team, across an entire body of documentation or code bases or things like that. You're dealing with a lot more kind of peer-to-peer real-time stuff. And so those are the things we're looking at in 2024 is how do we compound the productivity benefits, the suggestive capabilities that Pieces provides when it's running on your computer, but to the rest of the team? How does that, kind of look scaled up?
And in terms of the model deployment, model updates, what are the mechanisms that you have in place to manage some of that selection process, the capabilities of being able to split execution across either local contexts, online contexts, hybrid, some of the ways that you're thinking about that overall model serving architecture, given the fact that your target use case is this distributed sea of arbitrary devices?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like we are doing a lot of work. I think Brian Lambert on our team, like he PRs to Onyx a couple times. Onyx runtime is basically a pretty nice like uniform format to run certain model types, large language models, as well as LSTMs and transformer models and things like that. So Onyx runtime is pretty excellent. I think it actually is now shipping with Windows 11 natively, so it's a big Windows project. But that said, like how you get a model to run in a GPU or CPU, aka hardware accelerator regard, making sure it's not taking up too much RAM, making sure you're releasing the model from memory. We do a lot of kind of Dart to C FFI, and I would say even too like keeping a T5 in memory or keeping an LSTM in memory. We get a lot of complaints that like Pieces is using a good amount of memory. It's like it will, and hopefully the devices get better and the models get smaller and more efficient. But that's at the end of the day, you're putting a small brain onto your computer, right? A brain that can arbitrarily process data. But yeah, for the model, kind of pipeline itself, we train primarily, in house on a stack of MacBook M1 Maxes that we melt. I will say, being in Ohio in the winter, we have no shortage of heating that happens to be from our ML team. And I think like even getting the models, the small models are hashed, but the big models, like you have to go in and download, right? You have to say, hey, I want to use Llama 2. You go choose the model, it downloads. We don't ship any of those in the binary or the initial packaging because again, it's like each user, they have different requirements, they have different systems, and they want to opt into some things that are massive and some things that are small. So I would say we're still feeling out the bring your own model stuff, but for the small things like those are all hash. They install and update and upgrade on their own. The large ones, that's still pretty curious.
In terms of the actual workflow integration, you mentioned some of the different specific applications that people might want to integrate into their overall experience with Pieces. But I'm wondering, what are some of the types of workflows that you're looking to drive with this new capability and some of the ways that some of your early users are thinking about how to integrate this assistant into their day to day work?
Yeah, I would say As Pieces stands today, the largest kind of workflow, at least for me, is when I'm looking at open source packages. I'm like on Crates.io, I'm on pub.dev, I'm on npm, and I'm always looking at example code, right? And I'm always jumping over to GitHub issues. I'm looking at installation scripts, I'm looking at configs, and I'm really just trying to figure out like, okay, this is an interesting package. I may use this, I may not, but I just want to save this somewhere. And so oftentimes, I'll be looking at like, oh, like an image picker or like, a notification system. And I'll see like, oh, that's some good boilerplate, select, save to pieces. And I know pieces captures like the website, the other context, associated related links, all that stuff. And that was kind of what I was talking about, this concept of like fire and forget. There are a lot of things as a developer in that research and problem solving motion that are interesting, but not guaranteed to end up in production. Similarly, like when I'm, kind of in a large code base or I'm trying to find something like a way I did a promise resolution or the way I did some asynchronous stuff from a long time ago, I'm like, oh, I found it. I don't want to have to go dig this up later in tons of code. And also, too, I don't necessarily want to generate this, from scratch. I got to type out a sentence and describe it and, go back and forth. So I just want to select, save to pieces, and it'll capture who's related to it, what project it came from, what file it was, all of that. And so that's just like, how can I do the copy paste, the select save, all of that faster, easier, and with less mental overhead. And similarly, too, like, the generative process, I think, our largest challenge is I always have to set up, whether I'm using, ChatGPT or Bard, I always have to set up the context for it. GitHub Copilot is pretty good, and I would say they're doing a lot of work on context as well. But even then, it doesn't know like who or when or what I was doing in the browser or who I was talking to in GChat. It's not very horizontal, and that's been a big problem for us. Is saying who should I talk to about this, right? Or what was I doing yesterday? And that's a lot of the stuff that the Pieces Copilot does offer. And so, we're an early technology partner with GitHub. In the future, you'll sign it with GitHub. We'll use some of the GitHub large language models and GitHub Copilots behind the scenes, but also too, we're providing context that maybe GitHub doesn't have. And I would say, like, for us, these are the ways that you kind of use it in a very nuanced and subtle regard across the workflow, right? Researching, generating code, talking to team members, and these are ways that you maybe don't think are actually like value additive to capture, but it's actually 90% of your workflow. You maybe write code 10%, but the other time is like talking to people about what you're writing, talking to customers about how it went, even researching, how to do something or how to upgrade. That's really what we're targeting.
Because of the fact that you are a small team, you're early in the product life cycle, what is your process for determining the integration targets and the specific applications that you want to invest the time and energy into getting working and working well, due to the fact that there is this wide open set of options that you could integrate with, and how to think about reducing the surface area of the problem space, figuring out what are the interfaces that if we expose or that we implement are going to give us the largest possible set of capabilities, thinking in particular in terms of things like the language server protocol for text editors and IDEs.
Yeah, I would say, this is a good one. It's just like stack ranking. In the beginning, we wanted to, we're a team of like 18 or so, very technical team members. And in the beginning, it was like, what are the tools we're using? And can we dog food our own product, right? Like JetBrains, VS Code, like, GChat, Teams, stuff like that. Like, what are the tools we're using? And can we build integrations and experiences around those? And now it's really starting to scale to, okay, those are pretty interesting, but what can we do to get pieces like in a CLI, right? Like wherever I am, whatever terminal I'm using, like I would love to be able to, app pieces save or app pieces list or something like that. Just getting it in as many locations as possible. Now, the problem with this is everyone wants a different integration. You know how many dev tools there are out there, and that's it's hard to do all that, and it also costs a lot of dollars and introduces a lot of technical debt, right? Things you have to manage and maintain, and so on. So there's two things that we're working on regarding that. I think that first and foremost, let's open up these wonderful APIs that are literally just running in Pieces OS on your computer, localhost, whatever, and to our users, right? Like people are crafty and they can build, all types of stuff. We've seen that real quick out of the gate. And that's like the Python SDK, the TypeScript, and the Kotlin ones, and the Dart ones. Like all of our code, all of our SDKs are generated. So that was a no brainer for us, right? Generate them, open source them, put some content out there, and let's see what happens. But the second one is a larger kind of effort, which is primarily around why do we need to build integrations, right? How about we start to do a good bit more vision processing? And I say this like in the most like non-creepy way possible, right? But like, how do humans interact with their computer, right? It's the same way that like Tesla built their, autonomous systems. Like, how do humans drive? Well, they look around, right? They make decisions like that. So we started out on this vision processing journey almost a year ago now. And we are about to debut our first kind of really awesome vision processing model, which will enable you to take a YouTube video. Maybe it's a tutorial of how to code something or something like that. And we've gotten our kind of like code OCR model down to the point where it can run frame by frame, 30 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds, repair the code if it's broken, pull it out, stitch it together. And this will let you basically say, hey, Copilot, watch this tutorial before we have a conversation with it, and it'll pull all the code out. It'll have all that. So from there, we're saying, okay, we can understand what the URLs are. We can understand what's code, what's not code, what's related, what's not related. And we can do this in a way that's cheap enough to run completely on device, right? To run in the background in less than, a large usage of RAM, let's say less than 200 megs. And I think that's what it's going to take to have adoption of systems that see your world like you do. They need to be private. They need to be secure. They need to be performant. And I think like for us, what you're looking at, we wouldn't necessarily need to build an Emacs or a Vim plugin, because we can understand, okay, this is what's on the screen. Take like a clip or something and process that, and now suggest that to you in your feed. Or now, what are you looking at in the browser? What was in the IDE? Are they related? If so, coordinate those, shadow save them, up rank them and down rank them over time, and eventually they'll surface to your feed. Do this in a quick closed loop regard. That's something we're experimenting with, and you're going to start to see a couple of companies that are doing similar things like that. But I think that for AI to really be ubiquitous across the workflow, across the operating system, it needs that level of insight, pun intended.
Another aspect of this project and the way that you think about targeting developers and engineers is thinking about what is the level of control that the end user has, and how does that fit with your overall vision for the product and the sustainability? How do you think about what are the means that you are looking to for making this monetizable so that you can actually justify the time and energy that it requires to build this whole system? And what are some of the ways that you can encourage engineers to use the platform without having fear that they are going to either end up getting priced out of it
Yeah,
eventually
yeah.
or become the product eventually?
That's right. So first and foremost, if people haven't gotten it by now, we are offline first everything, right? And I think that's super important. So I'll say selfishly, that saves us a lot of server side compute costs, right? Let's just say that we don't have these massive models processing everyone's stuff all the time. So of course it's efficient from that regard. But the second thing is like you should be able to opt out of everything, right? I think like if you don't want it, you don't have to have it, right? And I actually think this next update has a lot of controls, even around like tags and links and things like that, of how much you want to generate, if you want it, if you don't, that type of thing. And so I think like opt-in nature, on-device nature, that's going to be table stakes for us. That must be the case. But the second thing is, everyone. I think our goal as a venture-backed company is to build something that's a true step function in experience, right? And systems that start to feel like an extension of yourself, right? That start to just be aware of what's interesting to you at that moment in time, and also to what you need from the past at a certain moment in time, like what you need when you need it. Those are systems we are, kind of embarked on to build, if you will. And that's our job as a venture-backed company. If it's not a 10x step function, then what is it, right? Like there are other ways to build. So we have to be extremely ambitious in that. When it comes to like pricing of this stuff, I think that you look at like GitHub Copilot or like Tab9 or some of the others. I think that around that $8 to $12 a month type of thing, maybe some add-ons, maybe some extras. that's probably, going to be the pricing range, right? We can make that efficient, by doing some of these kind of on device things and not having it all centralized and processing everything. There's ways to get smart about that. But what we're really building is like, to use the Iron Man analogy, it's Jarvis for your workflow, right? It sees, it's aware of what you're working on, and it's able to give you those things as like a heads up display, real time feed. And that's kind of autocomplete beyond the line of code. That's autocomplete at the what tab was I looking at? Who should I talk to? What was I doing yesterday? That's where we're really building towards. And I'll say this, we have the capabilities to do this not only for developers, but also for designers and animators and audio engineers and things like that, because Pieces is an extension of the operating system. It very deeply integrates with Mac OS, Linux, and Windows, and it understands not only what you're interacting with, but also that object type, that data type in memory on the OS. And we can capture that as well. So I think that people need tools like this. I think they should be affordable. I think they should always be on, and always be helpful. I don't think you should have to use them. I think it's nice to be able to tap into them when you need them, but it's nice to have that insurance policy, if you will. From there, we'll see. But I think the experience with technology, the experience with your operating system, will begin to feel a lot more of an extension of your thought process, and that's what we're trying to do.
As you have been building this product, as you have been getting it in front of people and early adopters, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen Pieces used?
Yeah, it's funny. We have the super organizers, which are like, they want every single level of control, over how things are organized in Pieces. And our philosophy, I'd say candidly, has been, you know does the internet, when you do a Google search, does it give you a list of directories back, and like, topics and stuff like that? No, it's pretty flat, right? So our kind of dream has always been like, just dump everything in there, and then let's give you a flat list of results, in your feed or in your search, results or things like that. So you have the super organizers, but then you also have the people that just like literally save everything, right? They're like, anything they look at, I'm not even kidding you, they just right click save to Pieces. We have users with over like 6,000, 7,000 snippets and links and tags and stuff. And we're like, how do we even make this thing performant for them again, right? Because they're just like saving everything. So kind of like threading the needle between the needs of the savers, but then also too, like we did a bunch of work around the Copilot at the end of last year, and we saw like a lot of people came in and they used the Copilot to like generate a ton of stuff, right? But then very quickly we saw them convert to savers. So that kind of proved out the thesis of like, oh, like our value prop number one, simply being able to save something for later, find it, reference, and reuse it, deeply correlates and complements the value prop number two, which is to be able to generate and explain and interact in a conversational regard with Pieces. So I think that was more surprising than expected. Is their informed value props, right? The generate, curate, iterate, they're deeply related. And then I think, the value prop number three, we will see how users like it, but we're really, really just putting in so much work. It's like 2.5 years in the making of the Copilot feed, right? The workflow feed. And that is just identifying first and foremost what's important, what's it related to, and when we should serve it back to you. And those are like the big, big things that we're trying to do. I'll be interested to see what users think of that, because it is not a feature they have to use. It's a feature like they can consume, right? It's like, hey, here's this link, open it. That's a consumption event, as opposed to here's Pieces, type out what you want, generate some stuff, and then, see if it's good. So like the amount of input that a user has to put in to get value out of the tool is about to decrease dramatically. So we'll see what that looks like, right? And how that informs behaviors. But users use it all types of ways: senior engineers, junior engineers, intermediate, the full stack, researchers, full blown like architects. We see all types of customers. Yeah.
And as you have been building this project, exploring the ways that people are using it, thinking through how do we apply machine learning to this problem of day to day workflow for developers, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned in the process?
Oh man, I would say getting machine learning systems to be integrated, fast, performant, and accurate and consistent. I think like those are the largest challenges. To what we were talking about earlier, like model drift or just unexpected outputs. I know a lot of the industry calls them hallucinations, but like the statistical and probabilistic, outputs from these models is just so hard to wrangle, if you will, especially in the wild. And that's going to be even more challenging when we make them multilingual. Um, but I also think consumer education around that stuff, understanding like, hey, this is helpful and it can be secure and private, and maybe this is something you should consider using. There's a lot of work being done around consumer education regarding AI and how it should impact your efficiency. So those have been challenges. And then you know because the tool we're building is like inobvious at first, in the idea of like why you would use it. Um, that is also challenging, right? We're trying to figure out how to communicate this system to people where it's like just save small things or let pieces save things for you, because I promise you, you're losing 90% of the things that you'll need later. And you might not realize that as a developer, but it always happens. You're always like, man, what was that thing from like 2 weeks ago, right? And that adds up over time. It's like death by a thousand cuts to your efficiency. Yeah.
And for people who are interested in having some sort of assistant for their development process, what are the cases where pieces is the wrong choice?
Yeah, I think, if you're looking for code generation or autocomplete, that is not us. We are not, we're not trying to be the best in the world at generating that next line of code, right? What we would like to be the best in the world at is telling you who to talk to about this code, or telling you what documentations are related, or maybe even what you were doing a couple of weeks ago that are related to this file, right? All the other components of your workflow context. I think we want to complement systems like GitHub Copilot and Tab9 and things like that, but we want to be very horizontal as opposed to very vertical. So I'd say, it's not the right tool to generate like in real time the line of code you're writing. That said, it is really excellent at generating solutions, where you need a promise resolution with a callback to cancel it, right? Or something like that. Or you're trying to explain some code, or you're trying to, understand again, like naturally who is this related to, or things like that. So, I would say when it's not the right tool is when you have a very, very specific problem to solve. When it is the right tool is when you just need to go through your workflow as you naturally will and save small bits of things that, you might need later, but you're not guaranteed to need. It's in that exploratory phase, right? That's kind of what I would say is like when you're going wide across the workflow, you're in the browser, you got all the tabs, you're jumping between repositories, you're referencing existing code, you're talking to people. That's when you should use pieces. It's excellent for connecting the dots and capturing those connections. But when you're focused on a singular dot, pieces is not the right tool.
And as you continue to build and iterate on the pieces product, what are some of the things you have planned for the near to medium term, or any particular projects or problem areas you're excited to dig into?
As I said, Jarvis for developers, right? That autocomplete at a level beyond the code. I think that the funny thing is that developer workflows are about to become absolutely insane. If they weren't already, they're about to become crazy. And what I mean by that is, you're going to be writing 2 times, 3 times the volume of code. You're going to PR way more code. You're going to ship way more features. You're going to work on a lot higher, cross-functional team environments, right? They're going to be like way more intricate with who you're working on, and that's because copilots let you be a generalist now as opposed to an expert. I can write C++, Python, Rust, and whatever else, Kotlin, because I can really go and get the fine details worked out by copilots. But what does that mean? That means I'm also looking at all the docs for all those things. I'm also looking at all the repositories for all those projects. I'm also talking to all the people that worked on those. So your volume of material that you're interacting with is about to, probably tenfold, right, if you will. And that's why Pieces is on the receiving side trying to capture, coordinate, and then serve back to you what's actually critical. And that's why I think like this idea of it's always on, it's proactive, it's understanding what's relevant from a in moment perspective and serve that back to you when you need it. That's really what I'm excited about. I feel this as a co-founder. I feel this as a technologist. I'm always researching the stuff that my team members are sending to me. My head of eng is sending to me. My plugin team members are sending to me, and it's really hard to like capture and connect all those dots. But this is about to be the case for every developer out there.
Are there any other aspects of the pieces project, the overall space of machine learning and AI capabilities as a developer enhancement or workflow enhancement, or the overall space of the ML evolution in the context that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I would say, we're looking at this evolution of agents, which is pretty cool in the market. A lot of people are talking about autonomous agents, agents that are able to coordinate with each other and do certain tasks. I think that in the same kind of thread of thought, always on large language models that are efficient and aware and capable, that is something that is really interesting and exciting for us, that we're trying to push. Like, how do we get a billion parameter model, not like a 200 billion one, right, but like a billion parameter model to be always on, very aware, and run in less than 500 gigs of or 500 megs of ram, right? And like, that is something that we didn't talk too much about, but a lot of the large language models today are prompted, and then you get a response, and they probably shut down, go to zero. In our world, we're super interested in just always on systems.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you and your team are doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest barrier to adoption for machine learning today.
I think its ability to be integrated everywhere and understand the largest level of context, right? The level that like we operate at. I think they're trying to increase these context window sizes. They're trying to retrieve all the relevant documents, embed everything under the sun, all to just give this stuff the proper information it needs. And I think the largest challenge to machine learning today is, if we are going to generate and really like have these massive LLMs running, I don't think we're ready for the compute requirements, or the scale that's going to be compounded. Like I said, if you're generating docs and images and code and everything like that, like 2023 and prior, it was generated by humans, and it had like a velocity of output. Now you put all these large language models behind everything, and like the data in the world is going to almost tenfold, if not 100-fold. It goes almost non-polynomial. And so now you're like, okay, we're building systems that can understand data that was already existing by humans. How do we build systems that's going to understand data that was generated by large language models and keep up with the pace? I think that'll be the challenge to truly globally adopting AI systems in every capacity of our digital world. It's just going to be so much data and very expensive to throw large language models at every single one of these problems. So that's kind of my challenge. It's a compute and data problem.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share the work that you're doing on the Pieces project. It's definitely a very interesting application of ML and AI, and I'm definitely very interested to see how it continues to evolve, particularly once you get Emacs support figured out.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
thank you for the time and energy that you and your team are putting into that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tobias. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other shows. The Data Engineering Podcast covers the latest on modern data management, and Podcast.init covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. Visit the site to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at aiengineeringpodcast.com with your story.